Hey, Mindy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Taylor, Coach Taylor.
Long time no talk. Super excited to reconnect. Your your uh, your personality is infectious. I love your
Oh,
story. And there's a lot that I think folks that listen to Endurance Minded can take away from your story. And yeah, out of the gate, appreciate you being willing to share. That takes a lot of yeah, takes a lot of courage, and I think you're awesome for being willing to dive in on the show. So thanks in advance, or thanks up
well,
front.
thank
Um,
you.
so I think a good place to start is um, you recently signed up for the Bigfoot 200,
Yep.
which for the non ultra running folks in our audience is a 200-mile ultra distance foot race, running event, whatever you want to call it. Usually lasts multiple days, 72 plus hours.
Mhm.
Typically, huge undertaking. You've done a lot of stuff in the ultra running space, and so I saw that on like social media, and I was like, well, that's no surprise. Of course, she signed up for a 200. But then, um, I also saw that you decided to defer. Um, and while tackling the 200 uh, is a big deal. I think I'm more interested in why you decided not to tackle it, because it really gets at the root, I think, of a lot of the stuff that I'm interested in, specific to endurance sports. Is some of these more like nuanced aspects of like why do we need to do it? Maybe it's not the
Mm.
right time to do it. Does it bring value to our lives? Is it the right, am I in the right headspace? So yeah, just what run me through, or maybe expand on like why it didn't feel like the right year to tackle the something like that.
Absolutely. So, just to let the audience know, so last year was a blur. I'm sure for a lot of folks, 2020 was a blur. That was also a blur, but 2021 maybe was a blur for a lot of y'all, like it was for me. And I felt like I was kind of going through the motions half the year, or maybe all of the year. I'm not really sure.
Right.
And sometime, I think it was in August, I was like, hey, like, I had a buddy that came to a group run. He was doing a 250, and Nicholas was like, hey, this is so cool. We can train together. You should sign up for something, or at least put in and see if you can get in for next year. And, kind of just flying through life, I was like, yeah, that sounds like fun. And I think I mentioned to Taylor, it seemed like the easiest thing to do at the time. Like, my life was such a mess. And I was like, well, 200 just sounds like a walk in the park right now compared to everything else.
Compared to everything else, yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, okay. So I put in, and of course I got in. Like, why not? The lottery gods were like, sure, we'll put you in this, and we'll draft your bank account. So it was sitting, and I didn't really tell anyone because I was kind of in shock, and also just the chaos of my life just didn't really allow me to really process that I'd gotten in. And then, like in December when I was switching careers into my dream career, they were like, oh, tell us something cool. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. I'm going to do this 200. So, like, in December, January is when it really started to knock. Like, hey, you've got this massive event, and you've kind of been what we consider lazy, for a little while. And I was like, yeah, I still got a couple months to think about it. So, January came, I started my new career, love it. I'm super busy. A loved one had a relapse with their addictions. I was navigating that, had to put our dog down. So, all in a span of just a couple of months, it was like just another whirlwind. And it really just, I don't know, when I sat down and thought about it and talked to my husband about it, I just, it doesn't make me happy. And I know you did an episode recently where you dove into doing things that make us happy. And running makes me happy, hiking makes me happy, being in the woods makes me happy. However, training, or even just thinking about what that would entail just gave me a lot of anxiety and it did
Mm-hmm.
not make me happy. So
Yeah.
I
Good.
deferred.
Good for you. Yeah. I mean, the reason I think that's so important to like tell that story, at face value, it might seem like, I know it doesn't feel that way because I've had to make the same decision, and it like carries a lot of weight to actually like admit that like I'm not in a space to do this thing. Like the pursuit of this thing is actually not going to be fun. It's and that like when I've made that decision, um, was like a big hit to like my athletic identity. I was like always the
Yeah.
person that could show up and like do the thing and commit to the training and what all the words and
Hmm.
whatever. Um, and so yeah, the reason I think it's like so impactful to call that out is because like it does carry a lot of weight, and I think that we so often um like we can use events too. And I think you had said this like before we jumped on the call, was that like it was like a good escape, right? You're like, oh, this is like, if all this other shit's going on, then like I can use this as time for me. But like it actually doesn't work that way a lot of times. um did you like, yeah, how did you navigate that, this idea, because it's a balance, right? Like, oh, here's this thing I really love, and on the one hand, you want it when times are really hard, like you want to be engaged in that thing because that's the space that actually helps
Hmm.
support you. But then like it can also drag you down, right? Like those goals can be too big, it can add too much weight, it can add too much to your plate. So like what was that process like for you to arrive there and actually, come to that realization?
Yeah. Well, to kind of cram a lot into a very short amount of time, I'm still working on that. Like it's not like I've really came to, like I've made the decision, I've sent in the deferment email, I've gotten the response back from Garrett and he's like, no worries. Of course, I was like after the deadline, so I like lost, I don't know, an extra, $500 or whatever it was, by like being late 3 days for deferring. But I'm still working on the identity piece because it's really multifold for me. I've been involved in the sport for a really long time here in the Southeast. And, my employer hired me and they've introduced me to some of my clients, one of which is a major influencer in the ultra running space, is like, hey, this is Mindy, she's signed up to do Bigfoot 200.
Mm.
And I know that that was something that was really exciting for my employer to introduce me as that. I also know that that's like, that they don't care if I'm doing it or not, they just want to see me happy and fulfilled. um so it's very multi-pronged with like my identity, not working at the running store anymore, really kind of shifting out of the space of being kind of this more like role model influencer type person into being more private.
Mm.
So how I'm addressing that is really just, I have no training plan. I'm running and hiking and walking and lifting when it feels good, which is really hard for me because I am one of those people, like, I probably still have a routine in my mind from coaching with you. And like, that's like the bare minimum. So, in my mind, I'm like 30 miles minimum per week with 2 lifting sessions. Like that's got to be it. But there's this whole notion of just pivoting and giving yourself grace because, I'm adjusting to life with one dog and one car. And, there's all these things that life just keeps throwing at me. And I'm just like rolling with it. My identity is just it's gonna come. So,
Yeah. Yeah, good for you. Yeah, I mean, I love that, the like grace piece, right? Like we can be so hard on ourselves as athletes about these like secret expectations, right? Like we hold them
mhm.
like behind the scenes or like close to our chest or whatever,
Yeah.
and like on the surface, we'll talk to our friends or our training partners or whoever, and we're like, yeah, I'm just taking it like easy, taking it as it comes. And then like secretly you're like, I gotta get up at 5 in the morning because I gotta get a 10-mile run in because like that's the bare minimum, or right, there's all these like secret boxes we have to check. um
Ugh.
Yeah.
Support boxes. They're the death of me.
It's super hard to get, like, I mean, some of that I think is like the human condition, and then I think it's exacerbated oftentimes by like our like athletic identity and the pressure we can put
Hmm.
on ourselves to like always be at the like the best, best quote unquote like version of ourselves athletically.
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and like totally fine to just like walk sometimes, right? Like to just like
Totally fine.
like this is not a run, like this is a walk, and
Hmm.
that's going to be it for today. um
Yep. Yep.
yeah.
Or performing well in other areas of your life too. Like, I really want to rock and roll in my career right now. And, I just joined the local search and rescue team. And so that's getting me out on the trails in a whole different way. And also mentally, it's just preparing me for other adventures that maybe isn't as physical as I'm used to, but it's way more mental than I've ever done.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, there's so much value in like pivoting and engaging in different things. I think that's such a productive exercise for endurance athletes, is like to purposefully engage in other areas that like are not physically hard, right? Like that's our bar so often as athletes. We're like, well, if it's not physically hard, like it's not worthwhile, right? Like I think a
Right.
lot of athletes struggle with that or have that, preconception. And yeah, you're
Hmm.
like, I can like shift that energy over here and 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 excel in this space. And it doesn't have to be physically demanding, but it can still be like worth my time and add
Yeah.
value to my life. um yeah, good on you. How's it feel to like um because like you're now in a very similar situation to like where I'm at, which is like your whole world is endurance sports, right? But right, so you got a job in the running industry. You're working with all these like high profile running companies. That's the topic of conversation, right? So,
Yeah.
but you're also kind of working to understand like the role that your individual athleticism plays in your life. How has
Mhm.
that made it better or worse? Like to be immersed in it, or not, or has it
Ye-
shifted it, or
Um, I go back and forth with this too. I think for a long time I was super burnt out from everything running industry. I think that peaked like in the fall of last year. So I am noticing I'm I've been journaling and reflecting on that because I do want to show up for my clients at work in a professional way with a newfound zest. I want to really be able to speak to the sport, speak to the gear, speak to the athleticism and the relevant current events that are happening while also just not feeling burnt out because I am super passionate about this community and this sport. So just walking a super fine line with, just I'm just taking every day as it comes right now in terms of my personal commitment to running and athleticism and just trying to stay super engaged in other ways, like by reading Trail Runner magazine or Ultra Running magazine. That way I just stay inspired, but from a distance.
right? Yeah, yeah, for sure. Do you find that it helps to have um like a diversified friend group? Like do you have
Hmm.
places you can go to connect outside of, because like the deeper into it
Mm,
you get, I've found that it's important to have friends that like don't talk about endurance sports, right? Like I need that outlet. Like I need some friends that like honestly, like maybe they don't even really exercise, right? They're just like
right.
good people and they fill my cup, and like we're not going to talk about ultra running. Like I know it.
Yes.
Is that like, do you have those people?
Yeah. So, you know what, Taylor? I'm going to be honest. For the first time in like 5 or 6 years, I have been really gravitating towards those friends and those friendships. And thank God they still, take me in. Even if I wasn't super participatory in their life over the last few years because I was being very selfish in my own pursuits, which, it has been a huge learning lesson for me.
Yeah.
I've really been gravitating towards those friendships And not necessarily because they don't talk about running, but because I've gone through so much trauma over the past couple of years that it's just so refreshing to have deep friendships that were in existence before running. And not to say
Right.
that my running friends aren't, qualified to be there, because some of my best friends are definitely my running friends, or I met them in running through running. But yeah, it's been very much more on a deep level.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned, like there's a selfishness, and I've talked about that on and off.
It's a tough word.
Yeah, it is. But I've had friends of mine tell me, specifically the like, I'll call them like the non-endurance sports friends, these people that aren't in that space, that were, have told me, like, kind of to your point, like when I did actively engage with those friends again, they were just like, we didn't know how to connect with you because we never saw you, right? Like
Yeah.
you were so focused on your own thing. Like you got up in the morning, you ran, they're like, we didn't feel like there was space for us in
Yep.
your life because you were doing these other things. How have you navigated that? I mean, that selfishness, because there is a I mean, that's one of the fascinating things with me. Like for me, always is that like there's always going to be this real balance and this real push
Hmm.
and pull. Is like the pursuit of big goals requires a very focused energy that
Yep.
is inherently selfish, but
Yep.
you need support, right? Like you can't do it by yourself, and so there's always this like, I'm over, you're engaged, and
Hmm.
that's going to be a very singular endeavor, but you have to have a support network, so you have to let those people in as well. Like how have you navigated the like selfishness piece with the like community piece?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't know if I can fully answer that right now, because, some of these friendships are surfacing again in this kind of more, I'm going to call it my lull state of training. I'm not training for anything. I'm training for life, baby. um, so I'm not really sure. I think, to really just be honest, I had to just hit rock bottom to really see the full picture of relationships, and that includes my running friends, that includes my marriage, that includes my family, that includes my, well, now it's just one dog. Um, that includes my non-running friends, my NRFs. Um, yeah, so, and
I'm
I'm still
stealing
figuring
that.
that yeah, I'm still figuring it out. I mean, maybe talk to me this time next year, and I feel like if there's anything I've learned over the past few months specifically, it's asking for boundaries and it's asking for permission. And I've gotten so good at that over the last, especially the last month, like with all of my friends, running friends and non-running friends. Like, hey, is this a good time to talk to you about X, Y, and Z problem? Or hey, do you have time to go for a run? Or hey, do you have time to go get Mexican food tonight? You know, so I'm still figuring that out, and it's just a lot of dancing and just boundary setting, not only for me, but asking for boundaries from my friends too. Like, hey, Ashley, who's my one of my non-running friends, is it okay if we don't talk about running? And is it only okay if we talk about challenges at work right now, like, or something like
Mhm.
that. I think it's just setting that stage, and those are things that I wish my friends, both running and non-running, would have shown me over the last like 10 years. I wish that
Right.
those things could have been shared. And maybe people, I don't know, like maybe some people just don't ever learn, but I'm really having to learn the hard way.
Yeah. Yeah, the communication piece is, um it's always challenging, and I think some people, maybe need more of it than others, like in order for certain individuals to thrive. Like I think, yourself and me, like I'm the same way, like heavy on communication, like heavy on understanding like what it is that that I need and what drives me and like what's gonna support those around me. And like it's important that I, I mean that's why this podcast exists, right? It's because it's like I'm just trying to like I want to talk to as many people as I can so I can figure out what the hell's going on. Um,
Right.
and yeah, I mean that's like an ongoing process
Hmm.
too. And and like as we evolve as people, that's one of the things I'm always um I always like try to impart like, with athletes or coaches or people that I'm talking to is this, we get like stuck in this like time capsule as
Right.
athletes where we're like, you know, this is how the weeks go and this is how my training goes and this is who I am and these are the things I train for and this and like that should evolve, like you should be multifaceted in your athletic identity, right? Like how you engage with your body and how you feel in your body and um
Hmm.
yeah, I mean you've gone through that obviously. Like have you had any of those like revelations where you're like, because I mean if it can be, in my experience personally and like working with athletes, like it's hard to get there. That it's not an extremely clear bridge to build or a path to follow. Is this idea that like every it's a journey and like what it looks like
Right.
5 years from now might be very different, but it doesn't mean it's any less valuable. um
Right.
yeah, I
No,
don't know,
you're so right.
what's that look like for you?
Identity is so big, and I also feel like it's very fluid and evolving. I think for so long my identity was, to be like the go-to person for women's running in the Asheville area. And
Hmm.
and I love to be the person that introduced people to the sport of trail running and getting people. I mean, I would literally like drive and pick people up and drive them to a trailhead, just to make sure that they felt nurtured and supported. And that there was nothing fabricated or, there was nothing that was, like selfish about that. Like, I just really enjoy nurturing people. However, it's such a big word as well. I've gotten burned, what I consider burned, or mistreated or tossed aside from this very sport that I love so much. Or maybe it's just better to look at it as I wasn't treated the way that I've treated folks, with care and compassion and kindness, because people are people. And, most of the time people are selfish, and that's okay to an extent. So, I think my identity lately has just been like, how do I stay private? How do I keep my head down and get through the day, sometimes the minute? And then how do I just continue to be authentic? And I'm still figuring out what the heck that even is either. Like, Mindy can have a backbone and she can also care for the world. Mindy can say no and she can also say yes. So,
Right.
Mindy can love running and she can also say no, to people and to running activities and, all the things. So,
Yeah.
figuring that out.
Yeah. I mean, I think you hit on something that I always, I see manifest itself with lots of athletes is this kind of, broken notion that like your passion has to be, has to like manifest itself to its fullest extent, like every day, right? Like for your
Right.
sport, right? That like, and maybe that's a little bit of like an like outward expression or that kind of gets like grafted onto us as athletes is they're like, oh, like you're an ultra runner, like are you fired up to run every single day, like is that the thing? And you're like,
Right.
no, like absolutely not, like
Right.
I'll, it might even last months where I'm not stoked, and maybe that requires a shift. And but it doesn't
Hmm.
mean you're less like that you're
Dedicated.
less dedicated. Yeah, like you can still be, like you said, you can still be the person who like is fired up and genuinely excited to like pick someone up to take them to the trailhead, and also the person that needs to sleep in on Saturday morning and like that's not the right day for a trail run,
Yeah.
right? Or
Right.
whatever. Or you engage with being outside in a different way. um
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, do you feel um, like, has that oscillation been something that like, does it feel easier to, because I know like you've obviously done a lot of work, you know, on yourself and understanding like what's right for you. Is that
Mhm.
something that feels a little easier to approach now? Like knowing that that passion can still be strong, but like its manifestation on a daily basis can look and feel very different? Or are you still like, is that kind of hard to grapple with? I really struggle with that when like, because
Yeah.
people are always like, Taylor, like, this is your whole life. Like, how excited are you? I'm like, some days I'm not that excited,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I struggle. I don't know. How's it felt for you?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back and forth. Like I had a big for me mileage week last week, and I haven't hit 40 miles a week, and I don't know, probably in a while. And I was like, woo! I was having like a little dance party on Sunday. But okay, so I'm gonna say two things about that. So okay, so Sunday, one of my close girlfriends, she is training for a 50 miler the first week of June. And, she's one of these amazing people who just, like, I never even talked to her really at all before last fall. And for some dang reason, she just kept coming into the running store that I managed, like, on a day, like almost on a daily basis sometimes, just to check in on me, because for some reason she was like, I'm worried about you. And she's like, I feel compelled to come and check in on you because you look like you need checked in on. And like, I didn't even really hang out with this girl. Okay. And so I really think she's like a guardian angel. I'm not super spiritual or anything, but I don't know. There's something there. But anyway, so she's training for this 50 miler, and she's like, hey, I'm going to do, this 20-mile run on Sunday. And I was like, okay, 10 out of 10 don't recommend going from like your longest run being like 9 miles to 20 miles. But my body felt great because I
That's
think I
awesome.
am finally just feeling good, like I'm
Hmm.
finally accepting where I'm at, and not fighting it. Like I'm not waking up like, dang, like I'm going to beat myself up if I don't go, for my usual Tuesday morning, 6 mile run and then go lift weights or whatever, like it's just more of like, if my day and my mood allows it and it feels right now, I'm going to just roll with it. So that's one piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle is, I know I'm also a creature of habit, and I love routine, and I love structure, and I love, just regimen in general. So I do fight with that sometimes. Like I fight with that regimented schedule of an athlete that I'm so used to having, and feeling like a loser when, I'm not sticking to a regimen, even if it's something I concoct on my own.
Hmm.
So I go back and forth depending on the day.
Yeah. No, I hear that. Do you feel like it helps to like, if you feel like you respond well to a schedule or like this regimented approach, but like to sub in different things, right? Like to still have those like benchmarks kind of, or those like high points, but it like looks and feels different, because I've
Mm,
I've like made the case, that like if like you said, like if Tuesdays are usually like a 10K in lifting, but that doesn't feel like fulfilling or it's not bringing you joy, like sub in a different thing, right? Like,
mm,
but finding a way to engage where you feel like you're still able to like um stay connected to like your body, specifically like through the lens of athleticism. Do you like deploy any of those things? Or like, okay, well, it's not this, but I still maybe like I'm going to infuse a little, like we talked about like the
mm.
secret check boxes, right? Like you're maybe like still
Yeah.
doing, you have a few of those, or is it like, is it best for you just to clear the schedule and like fly by the seat of your pants?
Oh my gosh, Taylor, like another $1 million question. So, like, I, in a perfect world, I would say yes. Like, okay, so today I was like, I'm going to get up, I'm going to go for a run, and, I'm going to do like a 10-minute weightlifting circuit here at the house. None of that's happened yet. So my plan B is I'm probably going to go for a walk because it finally stopped raining. And, like, so because I know I feel better whenever I move my body. I know that that gives me the clarity and the energy to be able to perform in all the other areas of my life. That includes professionally and personally. Um, so it's just a matter of having that discipline within myself, which I normally am good at doing, but sometimes I have to be okay with just being like, you know what, it's 6 p.m. I'm ready to eat dinner and lay down, go to bed.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I'm
Hallelujah.
not as good with that.
Well, I think, like, I mean, you touched on uh, that. Really gets back to that, like, that grace piece, is that, like, it's super important to, like, as an athlete, even if you're pushing towards a big goal and there are, like, benchmarks, you do want and maybe even need to hit, to know that
Hmm.
some days, like, it's just not the day, right? And, like,
Yeah.
a walk is the day, or a walk is what's best, or a rest, or whatever.
Hmm.
But you touched on something that is like my like personal passion and mission statement, which is this idea that, like, consistent consistent like consistently moving your body makes you better everywhere, right?
Hmm.
So we often, uh we have, like, our athlete, life, and then it's like everything
Hmm.
else that happens in our life is in this other sphere, right? And
Yeah.
I think that they're, like, you know they are,
But
and
yeah.
that certainly should be, like, intertwined in a way that, that consistent, like, dedication to movement helps you
Yeah.
be better in all areas of your life. So since you said that, and that's, like, the thing that I care the most about in this world, um, what like how does that manifest itself for you? Like, when you're moving, and it
Hmm.
doesn't matter what it is, like, but that's a piece that stays consistent. How does that help you in these other areas where you want to excel and show up as the best version of yourself?
Yeah. I, so what I'll do is like yesterday I walked, my office is in downtown Asheville and just so centrally located to all of the best coffee shops in Asheville. So,
Which there
you
are
know,
many.
there are many. So I treated myself with a mid-afternoon caffeine break and went for a walk. And that was a day after my long 20-mile run. So really, when I came back, I was like, I told myself, okay, Mindy, you're going to take this walk. And as soon as you get back, you have your client meeting with one of my big, high profile running clients. And then you're going to hammer out the rest of the day. Like you're going to hammer out the next couple hours of work because you treated yourself to an iced coffee, and not that I really believe, like, I don't want to get into the, triggers for disordered eating patterns and things like that. But I think, for me, it's when I can move my body, whether it's a walk, a run, a trail run, a weightlifting session, I am just so much more clear. And
Hmm.
I, I know that my husband would agree with me, like when I get grumpy, like, please, Mindy, just go for a daggum run. Like, just get out of the house or, whatever, because it really allows me to separate what's really happening in the world and what's really happening inside my head.
Right, right.
And I don't know why. I mean, I guess that's just endorphins. I don't want to get into the science because I don't know the science, and I'm sure you do, but
Well, yeah, I mean, science aside, I think that, like, clarity, like you said, I think that's a good way to sum it up, is like, when we prioritize that time for movement, which is also that time for ourselves, right? It gets back into a little bit of that, like, push pull against, like, there is a selfish component, because we have to carve out that time for ourselves in a world that's, like, constantly trying to pull us outward. And so when we do that, like, the clarity that comes from that has to go somewhere, right? And typically it goes to our jobs and our relationships and our other areas that
Mhm.
we have to show up, because we've given back to ourselves, right? Like, we've
Yep.
created that time, we've moved our bodies. The science that's
Mhm.
related to that then gets, everything that happens chemically gets pushed back into the other areas of our lives. And I do, like, yeah, like, it has to have an impact, and that's where
Mm-hmm.
like people, like, unfortunately, that's the first thing that often goes right. People get busy, and
Mm-hmm.
you're like, well, I had this workout plan, or I was going to get outside, or I was going to try to just stretch or move my body, engage with my body in some way that's physical, and I'll just that goes, and I'll do these other things, right? And I'm like,
I'll just
no,
keep
like
working.
do that thing first. Like that should be the thing, right? And then everything else,
Yeah.
I promise, will like feel better. Won't
Yep.
necessarily like fall into place magically, but um, yeah,
Yeah, you're creating
I,
that space, man.
right. So I want to. We had touched on it a little bit earlier, but I want to go back to this. You had mentioned kind of like trying to find, or not trying to, but working to find happiness, um, without running being like your key identifier. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's super impactful, and a very, not that it matters what I think about your personal journey, but I think it's like the most worthwhile, like speaking of clarity, right? Like it's super important to understand that like you can be a runner, and that like that isn't the only place happiness resides, right? Or you can be an athlete,
Right.
and that's not where you find the only place you find joy. Um, how how is that? How's that going? I think is maybe the best way to ask it.
Right. No, I think it's getting easier, when I was looking at my dog for a second. She's a great reminder. You know, I think it's just, I mean, it's definitely like an everyday process. I've had to really get good at being okay with not being okay. Um, investing where I would normally put coaching dollars into, mental health, so into regular therapy sessions to help me kind of digest some of the stuff that's been happening. I think that's been really critical for me, and I'm a huge advocate of mental health care. Not that exercise can't be a part of that, because it definitely is. Um, and I think having friends that really reinforce the space to be able to talk about some of those hard things. And these are some people that I didn't really think would be those people, even 6 months ago. Like these were people that have just really continued to show up in my life in a way that like has just been awesome. So if you can find and be open to, a couple of key folks that maybe aren't your running friends, but are just good-hearted people that you can, be vulnerable with. Or maybe they're just people who just keep showing up in your social media DMs or keep liking your stories or whatever it is. Yeah, this, it's just such a tough question. Like, it's just an ongoing journey. And, when I look at my single dog now, she's just a great reminder for me that she's 13. We had to put our other one down last month. She was 14. And I want to cherish this last little bit of time with her. Like if Bigfoot was still on the calendar right now, I'd be spending like every waking moment essentially training for that and not really nurturing the last little bit of time I have left with my pup, my 13-year-old pup.
Yeah,
And so I think like losing a dog and like just watching your significant, watching someone in your life go through addiction and what that entails, like it just reminds you you're not guaranteed another day. So
yeah,
do what feels good.
right. Yeah, for sure. I know. I went. It's amazing, like the perspective that you gain so often after you make these really hard decisions.
Mhm.
Like I had a very similar scenario. I backed out of an ultra distance race that I was scheduled to do last year, at the end of the summer, like early fall,
Mhm.
for very similar
Yeah.
reasons to what you're talking about. And it was, I went through all the same kind of processing things. And but then I ended up we lost our dog in October,
Oh
and
yeah.
so it's just like on the other end of that, I was like, man, you know what, like, because what I ended up doing was just like walking every day with our dog. And I was like, had I
Mhm.
been training for that race, like he would have gone
Mhm.
sometimes, but the super long ones, and like I would have been out, like it would have been a lot of time away. And like I spent, and I work from home too. I literally spent like every hour with him, like
Yeah.
for those months that I would have been gone. And yeah, like on the other side of that, I was like, what a gift, like you're able to see
Yep.
that, like that clarity where I was like, that was a super tough decision. And like, I
Mhm.
really struggled with it for, I mean, all the reasons we're talking about, athletic identity and who I thought I was supposed to be and this, that, and the other.
Yep.
Um, and then, yeah, on the other side, I was like, man, what a great, like, what a perfect time. That was exactly what it needed to be.
Yep.
Because I just hung out with him every day for, for like the
Oh.
whole summer. And we did a lot of walking.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. I know.
that's,
It's so hard to see that. It really is. It's really hard as someone that did, ultra endurance events for year after year after year, constantly training, every weekend, being gone, being, I don't want to say being given up because that's not, for people that are able to train right now and that's where their mind is like, good for you. Like, I'm happy for you. I want to see you go kick some ass out there. But, for the rest of us who maybe aren't there at the moment, we're also trying to kick ass doing, tending to our whatever else has us, occupied
yeah,
over here.
yeah, yeah.
So,
I think, I mean, you nailed it. I mean, yeah, the hope, for me and is that to just give people the tools through through stories like yours to understand that it's a journey, right? Like, yeah, you, like, if you're on fire right now, like keep it alive, and like, and that's great. And know that like there's some tools you need to deploy to make sure that's a
mhm,
productive experience. But when you're not
mhm,
on fire, and it will happen because that's the way life goes, like
yep,
that's okay too, right? And it doesn't
yep,
have to detract from your experience as an athlete, right? Like if you went from running 100
mhm,
miles a week to 10 miles a week, the sum total of the effort is still valuable, right? Like that engagement is still important. But
mhm,
there's a lot of shifting that has to go on there as well, right? Like you got to come off of that like
mhm,
expectation about,
mm,
well, this is what I used to do.
mm.
Have you dealt with any of that, like that kind of reflection on, like, because we always think about like the best version of ourselves, right? We never remember like all the hard times we had to like to like get there, right? Like
Yeah.
I remember, like when you and I like were, I was helping you train for some of your ultra stuff. It's like big mileage, and you're just crushing it every day. Like that's the person you're going to remember, because I do the same thing.
Because
Um,
I'm an overachiever.
right? Yeah.
I'm a
Have
perfectionist in every aspect of my life.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I'm the poster child for type A.
Yeah, same.
What has that like has that been challenging, like to
Mm,
know that person was like right kind of back in your rear view, and
oh,
and maybe
oh
you're
yeah.
different?
Yeah, and that's who people think I am still, Like,
Mm.
people will come to me, they would come to me at the running store when I was still there up until December, and they'd be like, "Hey, what are you training for?" And I just had someone comment on one of my posts, like, last week on Instagram, "Hey, Mindy, how's Bigfoot, 200 training going?" And I was like, "Damn it, did you not see that I canceled?"
Like pay
You
attention to the
know?
feed.
I I know. So, so it's just one of those things where I have to get really comfortable standing in who I am, which right now I'm just Mindy who's just surviving and really trying to nail it at work and nail it at home and enjoy lots of puppy walks with my old
Yeah.
lady dog and also squeeze in some miles whenever it feels, good for me. And I
Yeah.
want those miles to be fun. I don't want them to feel like torture right now. So
Right.
it's an ongoing, there's no answer. There's no like I've had to come to, well, I mean, I've had lots of come to Jesus moments, but I can't say that every moment I'm like, hell yeah, like I'm this
Right.
person. Like sometimes it's especially, and I'm gonna just say this real fast. When you see people who are like, I'm an ultra runner, and I'm like, okay, well, and not to squash their status, but I'm also like, okay, so am I still an ultra runner, even though I haven't ran an ultra in X amount of time? So like
Mm,
for me, being an ultra runner is really navigating the suck of life sometimes and also still showing up for life however you can. And just being
yeah.
fully honest with yourself. Like, am I an ultra runner? I mean, I guess by definition I am, but technically maybe not as of right now because I'm an ultra walker. So,
That's something too, you know, like yeah, I mean, um yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it is hard like we well, certainly with is there has to be or we have to give some credence to like the weight that you know social media you know we see all these like we see the best versions of like people's lives, right? So if we're looking at athletes and you're like there's an ultra runner and here's a you know whatever sport you're into, and that can be hard to
right.
overcome if you're not in that like best version play, even if you're like in the off season, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
athletes come to us all the time and they're like, well, my this guy, you know, girl is doing this, you know, and
Yeah.
you want to be like, well, so right, like that's
Right.
not right for you, but it's hard. It's hard as because you were always like comparing ourselves
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
others.
Yep.
So you started you started Trail Sisters in Nashville, is that right?
Yeah, I co-founded it. Let's see, I guess, gosh, has that been 4 or 5 years ago? I don't, yeah. And I stopped serving in a volunteer capacity at the local level last summer so that I could,
Yeah.
that was right when my life blew up. So it was perfect timing.
How so I know you've talked about, you know, having like and we touched on it a little bit, like you have all this like everything kind of, you know, around you is running related or you're immersed in endurance sports. And I know you made the decision to pull away from a lot of those commitments
Mm-hmm.
that were
Mm-hmm.
running related. So it's Trail Sisters and you were involved in other capacities, doing different things. You were, you know, certainly like a big ambassador for the sport at a, you know, regional level. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what, like what prompted that decision? Why did that feel valuable to kind of make some space there, you
Yeah.
know, in between those things and what you were, you know, trying to do elsewhere?
Yeah, definitely. So I think COVID, and I never like to bring up COVID, especially this far into it, but I think it really made the world very volatile, and I think it allowed people to develop some pretty unhealthy, um, I guess, relational skills, and so I just caught wind of some of that, and not from a national level. I love Trail Sisters. It's still one of my like favorite things. Like, I give her money. Like, I'm totally huge fan and I believe in it. I just think, um, I think it was, I think as a leader, things were starting to kind of crumble because of COVID. And I just didn't have the bandwidth to like continue to be a mediator. I'm such a giver and I will literally put everything ahead of myself and also ahead of my family. And that has backfired so much and I've had to learn the hard way. So again, it comes back to like, it's been a lot of awakening moments the past year. Um, so yeah, I think just giving myself the distance and also allowing some of the other leaders, other volunteer leaders to step up and really take ownership over the club has been a really great thing to watch. So it needed to happen, like it was just a great time. And I think it allowed me to really just step back and focus. I think the universe works in the way it needs to. You don't always see it. And a lot of times it can be very painful, but I think it was the universe being like, hey, Mindy, like you need to come and focus on your family now. Like, you
Right.
know, we're going to shake it up bad enough where you actually are forced to stop, or you feel like you're forced to stop giving your attention in this manner to this department and put it over here on this in this department.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah. Well, it's probably necessary. Oh, I mean, I'm sure it was necessary for like, um, for you know your ability to continue to like show up where you needed to show
Mm-hmm.
up and um, to be
Yeah.
like present for, for your family, but like also for your running and for your like your ability to continue to move. Like if you're worn so thin, right, like you
Mm-hmm.
can't show up and be present like when you're trying to exercise or when you're trying to set, personal goals. um yeah. What do you,
Mm-hmm.
um I know what, like, how do you stay focused on trying to keep things like long term oriented, right? Because I think
Mm.
a lot of people, unfortunately, I think you had touched on this, was like specifically with like ultra distance stuff is super popular now, right? And like
Yep.
everything is just like harder and harder and longer. And that's cool. I like
Mm-hmm.
long, hard stuff. But like, if you, so many people go into it and they burn out, right? It's boom and bust, which is so unfortunate because you just, from my perspective, like you actually aren't able to reap the like full benefits of being an athlete, like the stuff we were talking about, like the fact that it makes you better in these other areas of your life, and like the hard times really are like what it makes it so valuable. um
Yep.
so yeah, like how do you view that kind of long haul like athleticism?
Mm-hmm.
um
Yeah.
yeah.
Definitely. No, I think this is a good question. And I think it's a great segue because it's something I've been reflecting on quite a bit. I'm like, okay, so I'm just in this survival mode day to day. Sorry if I got really windy there. um, it's like, woof. But being an endurance athlete or just being an athlete in general, I don't, yes, I can only see to like the next day right now, but I'm also thinking like, okay, is there a race that I might want to do in the fall? Or, my best buddy and I, Tara, I know you know Tara, like, is there a fast packing route that we want to complete this summer, on the Appalachian Trail? I really want to attempt SCAR. I've been talking about it for a few years. I would love to even just attempt it. SCAR, which is the Appalachian Trail through the Smokies, which is really tough. It's like 70 something miles with a gazillion feet of vertical gain. It's like right up my alley. um, and, so, I mean, that can't just happen, with 20 miles a week of walking. I mean, it could, but it may not feel very good. So, I'm really thinking, okay, so if I can just keep doing what I'm doing right now, which is getting really comfortable being uncomfortable, um, and still continuing to focus on movement every day. My mental game is so strong, Taylor. Like, I could do anything I want right now. Like, I've got the mental drive because of what I've gone through and because I'm giving myself so much self compassion and self love. Like, I know that at any moment I could flip a switch and be like, okay, I'm ready to start training, dedicated training to X, Y, and Z goal. Um, and also Bigfoot, like, okay, so that's been deferred and I'm not going to lose like $1,000. So that's definitely happening next year, whether I like it or not. So
Yeah, the financial commitment helps, like it is. I had an
yeah,
athlete tell me that one time. It's just like the more skin you have in the game,
yeah,
financially, the more invested you are in the pursuit, right? You're like, well,
it's true.
I'm not going to not show up because I've spent the money now, right? Like I think that's a fair, like we
Yeah,
all feel that. Yeah. I mean, how, like,
definitely.
I think, do you feel like it's more valuable to like keep your, maybe more valuable is not the right way to phrase it. Like, is it um is it just as important to keep your like mental game sharp versus like your physical game, right? Because I think like I'm with you, right? Like I'd rather, like I can have like, no, I'm not physically ready, but if I feel like I've been there mentally where I need to be, like I can tackle it, right? Like it sounds
Yeah,
like you're kind of in the same boat. Do you feel like it's worth like making sure that's good, even if the training
yeah,
maybe is not like you're not in a place?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the passion coupled with the fire from, going through hardship, I think yeah, I think if your passion is there, like if I wanted to roll into SCAR, next month, which I won't because that's too early and there's a lot of rattlesnakes right now. But if I'm like, okay, October, sure, it's like that sounds like a great time. The water will be flowing, be less rattlesnakes, and that's plenty of months to train for it. You know, I think having gone through what I can speak personally, like having gone through what I've gone through, as long as I have my family's support, and they are cheering me on and it's the right time for my family to allow me to train for something, then I'm like, yes. The mental game is so critical. It is
Yeah.
because none of these things are easy. Hell, even 5Ks are not easy, like
Right.
yeah, like
Yeah.
whatever you're training for, like you need to be mentally tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you feel like I know. I mean, you're obviously doing a lot of work in that space, but do you? I think we hear from athletes. I'm sure maybe you've even been in this camp, but I'm sure you've talked to people who are like like, oh, like running is my therapy, right, or whatever,
Mm,
right? And so we have a
I
hard
hate that.
time. Yeah, and I like it's a separate thing, right? Like you still like mental health, mental skills, refinement of those things, understand like that's that actually
Hmm.
like helps you with your athleticism.
Hmm.
Like has that been because you've just kind of
Hmm.
made that, I know you just started to work on that like last year, like has that been an
Hmm.
important kind of like disconnect for you to be like these are actually two separate camps and I actually
Yeah.
need to work on the mental piece separately in order to like fully enjoy the athletic piece.
Absolutely. Yeah, my therapist, I mean, I started working with her in August, and it's only been the last few months that I've really been able to fully open up to her, which I mean, hey, trust is important. And I know
Right.
she's so grateful for it because like now it's just free flowing. But we talk a lot about you know failure. Like that's a big word that's a big theme that keeps coming up in a lot of our conversations, because my whole life for the last 2 years has felt like failure, like it just has, and that's probably a whole separate conversation, and we've danced around it today. So it's like, yeah, I think, and also watching a loved one suffer from depression and anxiety and suicidal ideations. And when I hear people say running is my therapy, I'm like, you know, running can be a very therapeutic form of healing. I don't think that it is a form of therapy.
Mm. Yeah.
If it was, then this person may have not ended up in the situation that they did, because they are also a runner and an athlete. They don't like it as much as I do, but you know
Yeah.
so yeah, I think, but I mean, I'm not gonna badger people. I think everyone is entitled to their own mental health journey. My counselor would never say that I am depressed. That's not like that's not a diagnosis that I've ever been diagnosed with. But I mean, we all go through our own journey, and I think being able to talk about failure and expectations, and being selfish, and just your identity as a person, I think all of these things are critical to understanding what role running plays in your life, whether it's competitively or for fun or both.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't. I think that's great. I always try to just highlight. If I'm having conversations with folks, whoever I'm talking to or whatever. I think we can. Endurance sports maybe unfortunately has kind of been sold as that. And so athletes oftentimes will think that they're getting like the mental kind of clarity or
Mhm.
guidance that they need when they engage in their sport. And like I think, yeah, I think like
Yeah.
I think you nailed it. Or I really like the way you put it. It was like it's a can be a valuable form of therapy, but it's not the same as like mental health. But I've always been a big advocate. Like I've just say like like, hey, like these things you're dealing with are not, even in my capacity as a coach, be like, this is not my lane, right? Like I'm in your corner, but like you need, it requires a team, right? And that might be many different individuals that are going to help you understand, how to pursue your goals and how to be balanced and healthy and happy and fulfilled.
Right. Well, and
Yeah.
one last thing I'll say about that real fast is in working with my therapist, counselor, whatever you want to call her, um, I think she's a licensed therapist. I think that's the appropriate professional title. Um, one discovery that she and I have worked on that's been really painful is the void. Like running can fill a void.
Hmm.
And, like that may be a whole separate conversation too. But, for years and years, like I've just said yes, 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 yes. Everyone has gotten a yes except for me because I want to just run away from the pain of losing my father and just, maybe some dissatisfaction in other areas of my life, and so running filled that void. And I was able to be in the spotlight. I felt like it was something I was maybe not good at in terms of like time, but it was like, I can say, I can show up for running and be good at that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, that's something my therapist and I are figuring out. We're working on that together. Well, I mean, she's opened the door and I'm working on it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, good for you. Yeah. I mean, I hats off. I think that like that's such a valuable realization. Again, that's kind of been popularized. It's just like running from your demons, and you run and you find these dark places and dark corners of your mind, and you tackle them when you're in exercise, and that while that might actually occur, like it's engagement in endurance sports is not going to solve that, right? Like it might
No, it
actually
will
just make,
backfire.
yeah, it might just make you actually like much more painfully aware of that darkness, and that you need to you know find
Yeah.
support in other areas, right, that are going to help you, grapple with
Yep.
that and understand how to process it.
Yep.
Well, thanks, Mindy. I am extremely grateful for your time and your story. I love everything you got going on. You're such an inspiration. Thanks for being vulnerable and telling your story. And keep it
Thanks,
up.
Amy.
You're crushing it. Take all the walks. Spend all the dog time. Don't run a mile if you don't want to. You're on it.
Don't worry. I won't or will.
All right. Thanks, Mindy.
Cool. Thanks.